My husband always insisted on being the one to take our daughter to her allergy appointments. Every single time. Not once in 3 years did he suggest I come along. I thought it was sweet, honestly. He was hands-on in a way that a lot of my friends' husbands weren't. He packed her lunch, he knew which snacks she could eat and which ones would send her to the ER. He kept her EpiPen in his jacket pocket like it was his wallet. I told my mother once that I'd married someone who actually showed up, and she said I was lucky. I believed her. His name is Conrad. We met at a fundraiser in Ottawa when I was 28, the kind of event where you don't expect to meet anyone real, just people performing the version of themselves they want to be seen as. Conrad was different. He was quiet in the way that reads as depth before you learn it might just be concealment. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered things. On our third date, he brought up something I'd mentioned in passing on our first, some offhand comment about my grandmother's garden, and I remember thinking, this person pays attention. This person is safe. We got married 14 months later. Our daughter, Pippa, was born the following spring. She was 6 weeks premature and spent 11 days in the NICU, and Conrad never left the hospital. He slept in the chair beside her incubator. He learned the names of every nurse. When we finally brought her home, he was the one who set the alarm every 3 hours for feeding. I was recovering from the emergency C-section and he just stepped in. Completely. So when he started taking Pippa to her allergy appointments alone, I didn't question it the way I should have. She developed a reaction to tree nuts when she was 18 months old. Nothing catastrophic the first time, hives along her neck, some swelling around her mouth, but the allergist, a woman named Dr. Chaudhry at the Keogh Clinic, had flagged it as potentially severe and recommended close monitoring. Conrad took charge of the appointments the way he'd taken charge of everything else. He scheduled them, he drove her, he reported back to me afterward. She's doing well, nothing new. They adjusted her action plan slightly, nothing major. Dr. Chaudhry says she might outgrow it. I was working full-time at that point, managing a team at a policy research nonprofit in Gatineau. My hours were long. Conrad was freelancing in project management, which gave him flexibility. The arrangement made sense on the surface. It made so much sense that I stopped looking at it carefully. The first time I felt something was off, I pushed the feeling down almost immediately. Pippa was 3.5. I'd taken a half day from work to surprise her with a trip to the Tulip Festival, and when I went to pull up her health records on the provincial app to check something, I can't even remember what now. Maybe whether she'd had her flu shot. I noticed a specialist referral I didn't recognize. A Dr. Beaumont at a private pediatric clinic in Westboro. The referral was from Conrad's email, not from Chio, not from Dr. Chaudhry. I asked him about it that night. He was making dinner, his back to me, and he said without turning around that Dr. Chaudhry had suggested a second opinion on the immunology workup and he'd followed up. He said it so easily, so cleanly. I watched the back of his shoulders and I thought, okay, he would have mentioned it otherwise, I didn't bring it up again. Conrad left for Vancouver in March for what he described as a 3-week consulting contract. A firm there needed someone to oversee its transition project, he said. Good money, necessary timing. I told him I'd manage. I'd managed before. On the 4th day, he was gone. Pippa woke up with a fever and a rash on her forearms. Nothing allergic looking, more like a viral thing. But I wanted to get it checked. I called Chio to see if Dr. Chaudhry had any availability, and the receptionist pulled up Pippa's file. She paused for a moment, just a small pause, and then said, I see she's had quite a few appointments recently. I said, yes, the quarterly monitoring. Beyond those, she said carefully, there's a note here about an extended panel workup in January and another in February, under Dr. Beaumont's supervision. Did you have questions about those results? I said, I'd call back. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while after I hung up, not because I understood what it meant yet, just because my legs stopped working. I took Pippa to a walk-in clinic for the rash. It was viral, nothing serious. And then I drove to the Chioki outpatient wing and asked to speak with someone in patient records. I explained that I was Pippa's mother and that I was trying to understand some appointments I hadn't been informed about. They were kind. They printed what they could. The January workup was a full blood panel. Tissue typing, HLA matching. I didn't know what HLA matching was. I Googled it in the parking lot while Pippa slept in her car seat. My hands were cold even though I had the heat running. HLA matching is how you determine whether a person is compatible to donate bone marrow or receive it. I called Dr. Chaudhry's office and asked for a callback. She called me back within 2 hours, which told me she'd been waiting for this conversation. She came to see me in person the next morning, at a coffee shop near our house. She'd taken a break from her clinic to do it. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table. And she looked at me with an expression that I will not be able to describe properly, only to say that it was the look of someone who has been carrying something on behalf of another person and is relieved to finally set it down. She told me that Pippa had been tested twice in the past 8 months for HLA compatibility with a specific recipient, a child, a boy. She said she hadn't ordered the tests. They'd been ordered through Dr. Beaumont's clinic using a referral from our family GP that she later confirmed Conrad had arranged without her involvement. She told me she'd had concerns for some time, but that she hadn't been able to act without my knowledge and that she was glad I'd come to her. She told me the recipient's name was not in Pippa's file, but she told me what she knew. Conrad had a son. From before we met. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Pippa was with my mother that afternoon, and I was grateful for that because I needed the house to be empty when I walked inside. I went to Conrad's home office. He was meticulous about it. Organized in the way that obsessive people are organized, not for practicality but for control. I had never had any reason to go through it carefully. I went through it carefully now. In the second drawer of his filing cabinet, behind a folder of old tax returns, there was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were documents in 2 languages, English and French, which wasn't unusual for Ottawa, and several printouts from a medical facility in Montreal. The name on the recipient file was a boy, 6 years old, a rare blood disorder. A bone marrow transplant was the only remaining viable treatment option. The boy's last name was Marchetti. Conrad's mother's maiden name. There was a photograph. The boy looked like Conrad around the eyes. He was sitting in a hospital bed with a stuffed polar bear on his lap, and he was smiling with the careful smile of a child who has learned how to smile for adults who are worried about him. I also found a letter, not addressed to me, addressed to Conrad from a woman I'll call the boy's mother. I won't use her name here because she wasn't fully innocent in what happened, but she wasn't the architect of it either. The letter was dated 2 years before Pippa was born. It described their son's diagnosis. It talked about treatment options. It said, near the end, that she hoped Conrad would find a way. It said she knew he would. I think about that sentence sometimes. I know he would find a way. The way he found was me. I called my sister first because she is the person I call when I don't know what I'm doing yet. She's a social worker in Kingston, and she has a quality I've always envied. She can hold terrible information without immediately needing to fix it. She just sat with me on the phone while I described what I'd found, and when I finished she said, "Okay, you need a lawyer before you do anything else. Not tomorrow. Today." I called a family lawyer in Ottawa that afternoon, a woman my colleague had used during her divorce, highly recommended. I described the situation. She told me to bring everything I'd found, make copies, and not to confront Conrad until we'd spoken in person. She said it twice, do not confront him yet. I didn't. Conrad came back from Vancouver on a Sunday evening. I picked him up from the airport. I made dinner. We watched something on television, and I sat beside him on the couch, and I kept thinking about the photograph of that little boy with the polar bear, and about the HLA tests run on our daughter without my knowledge or consent, and about how Conrad had once told me that he never kept secrets because secrets were what destroyed people. He'd said that on our second date. I had thought it was one of the most honest things I'd ever heard a person say. I waited another 4 days. My lawyer was gathering information, making calls, preparing a letter to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario about Dr. Beaumont's conduct. She'd confirmed that the tests run on Pippa were done without maternal consent, and that this was a significant breach of medical ethics. She'd spoken to someone at CHIO. She had the envelope. On a Thursday evening, when Pippa was at my parents' house for a sleepover, I sat down across from Conrad at the kitchen table, and I told him I knew about the tests. He didn't deny it immediately. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said that he was going to explain everything, and that what he'd done had come from desperation, not malice, and that he'd never intended to move forward without telling me. I asked him when he'd planned to tell me. He said, when the time was right. I asked him how old Pippa would have had to be before the time was right. He stopped talking after that. What came out over the next 3 weeks, through the legal process and a formal complaint review, was this. Conrad had known about his son's condition before we started dating. He'd spoken to specialists in Montreal who told him that a compatible sibling donor was the strongest chance for a successful transplant. His son had no siblings. Conrad had no other children. He had chosen to have one. he'd chosen deliberately with full awareness of what he was doing. He'd met women, assessed them for health history and genetic compatibility in ways that I now understand were not accidental. He'd asked about family history on early dates, in ways I'd thought were just him being thorough, interested, careful. He'd had me genetically profiled, a cheek swab I thought was a wellness test offered through his company's benefits package, which I now know was sent to a private lab, before we got engaged. When Pippa was born, he'd felt what he described as genuine love for her. He had not expected that. He said it as though it were a mitigating circumstance. He had continued with the testing anyway. The complaint against Dr. Beaumont was reviewed by the college. He had administered HLA compatibility testing on a minor without the consent of both legal guardians, under documentation that listed only Conrad as the authorizing parent. Dr. Beaumont's license was suspended pending a full investigation. The investigation is still ongoing as I write this. Conrad was charged under the criminal code. The specific charge, and I want to be precise here because I have been imprecise in so many other parts of this, was administered without full legal consequence in the initial proceeding, which was a civil matter. His criminal charges related to fraud and the unauthorized medical decisions made on behalf of a minor without guardian consent. He pled guilty to a reduced charge after his lawyer negotiated. He received a 2-year conditional sentence and a restraining order. 2 years. For a plan that had taken close to a decade to execute. My lawyer had fought for more. I was not the only one who found the outcome insufficient. But the Crown was satisfied, and the Crown's satisfaction is apparently what determines what is sufficient. The boy's mother reached out to me once, by email, through her own lawyer. She said she hadn't known about the testing. That she'd known Conrad was trying to find a compatible donor but hadn't understood how. I believe her, partly. I believe she'd told herself not to ask too many questions about how. I didn't respond. The boy has since undergone a transplant from an unrelated donor match found through the Canadian Blood Services Stem Cell Registry. The match was found 8 months after everything came to light. I don't know how he's doing now. I try not to think about it in a way that will consume me, because there is a version of this where I spend the rest of my life tangled in the moral geometry of it. His suffering, my daughter's safety, what I was supposed to feel, what I was not. I cannot afford to live in that version. I have a daughter to raise. Pippa is 4 now. She still has her allergy. She still carries an EpiPen. She still loves tulip festivals and the particular kind of juice box that has the little star on the straw wrapper. She asked me last week why Daddy doesn't live with us anymore, and I said that sometimes grown-ups can't live together even when they love their children, and she accepted this, the way 4-year-olds accept things, completely, and then moved on to whether we could have pancakes for dinner. I have moved on in the ways that matter. I have not moved on in the ways that don't yet. My mother asked me recently if I blame myself for not noticing sooner. I told her I'd spent a long time with that question, and I'd decided the answer was no. Not because there were no signs. There were, but because I had trusted someone who had designed himself to be trusted. That is not a failure of instinct. That is what a certain kind of person does. They learn what trust looks like from the outside, and they wear it like a coat. Conrad had worn it very well. My daughter will know the truth when she's old enough to understand it. Not everything, not all at once, but the truth in the proportion she can hold. I owe her that I will not build another structure of careful omissions and call it protection. That's what I promised her the night everything finally came clear, sitting in the rocking chair in her room while she slept, with the nightlight making soft shapes on the ceiling. I don't know if promises to sleeping children count. I think they might be the ones that count the most.